So like everyone else in the industry, I've had time off. And it's varied, sometimes a few weeks, a couple of months. The longest I've gone so far was 6 months. And I think I was a bit of a fool, if I'm being honest, in that part of my personality is I tend to be very loyal. And during that big break in particular, I was waiting for Studio A to basically find work and hire me back. Now, something that should maybe be mentioned at this point is that Studio A, I had discovered, was one of the best as far as how it took care of its employees. I had heard horror stories from people who didn't get paid for the work that they did, or studios mismanaging their money. Studios who were very frustrating to work for because they had too many levels for approving the work. And so, like, you had like 4 or 5 levels of supervisors, it sounded. Like you had to make it through the first person. They approve the work, goes up to the next person. Next person thinks it should have been done another way. So now it comes back to you, comes back to that person. And then, a lot of back and forth. Something else that should be mentioned was, at this time, animators, at least in Ottawa, were paid unit rate. So what this means is the money we made was relative to the amount of frames that we produced. And so the more you could animate at a good enough quality that it would be approved, the more money you made. So this studio took care of its people. And because I had heard all these stories, I had no inclination to go work somewhere else. So I just sat and waited. And the money I had saved up basically vanished over that time. Now, luckily enough, they called me back, which was often the case because of my experience, because I had made myself so valuable for the company. I was among the last people being cut and among the first being called back. So I can vouch to the importance of making yourself valuable to a company, to the market. That being said, I regret not having worked at some of the other studios in the area. Studio X, I'll call it, right? I was at Studio A. Studio X was another studio in the area, and they were known for really the high quality of animation that they could produce. What I heard was, if you want to be a great animator, an excellent animator, that was a good place to go to. But it was a very difficult place to work at. Something about the environment, something about the way the pipeline worked, the different levels of approval, and being unit rate. Many animators made very little money. But if you wanted to become a good animator, that was the place to go. And in a way, I regret not having gone because, one, at least it would have been income, some kind of income coming in. But the other thing is just from a networking perspective, meeting new people. In Studio A, I was just in that one bubble. I stayed inside that circle of people. And I think there were some lost opportunities over the years because I didn't get to know, people from other studios. And so I don't want to say that loyalty is foolish, but you have to look out for what's best for you and your career. And because it's kind of a small industry, knowing all these people, building this network can be very helpful for sniffing out other opportunities when they come up. So if I have one regret in my career, that's probably it, was not going out there and not putting myself out there as much. In any case, it was around this time where, through some people I knew, I found a freelance contract. It was basically just me, or it was supposed to just be me. I had a budget, and I basically had to create everything from scratch. I can say it was a music video, so I at least had something, but I had to come up with the ideas, the storyboards, basically everything to come together. And I came to realize that I had some shortcomings in that the project was more than I could take on as one person. I think I remember I had always intended on hiring people to help me out, but the main thing I was responsible for was coming up with the ideas for the storyboard and all that. I knew that once the Leica was done, that everything would fall into place. I had a lot of friends that I was convinced would be willing to help and pitch in. So I got to working on this, and it dragged on much longer than it should have. I'll admit that. In hindsight, I maybe should have hired a storyboard artist. I think it was a good experience for me, but I really, really, truly feel bad for the musician for who I was doing this, because it dragged on much longer than it should have. And it was something that he needed to promote his work, the album that he had put out at the time, right? So I guess if there's a lesson in that, is to understand where your strengths are and to play to them. Eventually, the Leica got done and everything fell into place. I hired on a designer, background artist, and some animators. We were able to put it together pretty quickly after the Leica was done. If ever I was to take on something like that again, I would definitely find an idea person. Once the target is set, I'm really good at problem solving to hit that target. But defining the target is probably not my strong point. So I'd done that little contract, and eventually I got hired back on by Studio A as an animator. And then I started playing around with some of the other departments. The studio at the time didn't have an official effects department, and it was something they wanted to start up. And I was approached by the director on one of the shows to be the effects artist, because I had done a few effects type things, on shows that he had directed. And so I was an effects artist for a while, and then I went back to character animation, and then I went on to editing Leicas. Out of all the departments I've done, I think Leica editing and character animation, those are the two things I really, really, really enjoy doing. And after Leica editing, I got into compositing. So all that time, those years before, where I learned compositing, I was now able to apply that knowledge in the actual compositing department, right, for this studio. It probably helped that during that 6-month time off thing, I gave myself a bit of a project to practice what I had learned in those After Effects videos I had been watching up until this point. So I had shown that project to the studio coordinator, and I think it showed that, I at least knew the software. So that's probably why they considered me for the compositing department. So it was kind of interesting, because then I could edit the Leica and then do character animation and then get into compositing. Work through that cycle a little bit. So I was bounced around between the different departments, and I enjoyed it. But the two things I really enjoyed the most, I think, were character animation and Leica editing. Now, at this point, I don't know if you remember, I had said 2 years in the industry, I had decided I wanted to be a director. Throughout those years and working in the different departments, I think I touched just about everything except for scene setup, which I did during my freelance contract, actually, and anything to do with backgrounds. So no layouts, no BG painting, nothing like that. So BG and setup are the two things I have no real professional experience in. As a Leica editor, I did get to revise storyboards every now and then. We'd get notes from the client, and they wanted to restructure things around a little bit. And so sometimes I had to, edit the storyboards to meet the client's requests. And so anyways, throughout these years, I got to a point where, I had sat down with directors and the studio coordinator, had many, many conversations, basically asking them, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, how do I get there? And everything I was being told was just vague, we just need the right opportunity. And I never felt they were fully straight with me. And so I got to a point where, as an animator, I felt like I had plateaued and I had learned everything I thought I could, at least at this place. I felt like the next step would have been moving up to supervisor. I saw other people move up to positions that I wanted to hold, and every time I'd sit down and ask, what am I missing? What's going on? Why not me? And I never got the answers or the guidance that I was seeking. So I started to feel like a big fish in a small pond. I felt stifled. Things were not moving forward for me in my career. That's how it felt. I remember one time on this project, they needed a supervisor, and they brought in someone from the outside. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but he had actually worked remotely for the studio. His work was excellent. I just didn't know about it. To me, it looked like they needed a supervisor, and they just hired this random guy from who knows where to take on a position as supervisor, which I felt at this point I had earned a chance to get. Now, the interesting thing is that for inspiration, I would often go to the 11-second club, and there was this one animator whose work would come up every now and then, and I would just be in awe. I love the stuff that he was putting out. And I remember when I heard about this outsider being hired as a supervisor, I was kind of pissed off, like, who is this guy? And so I Googled him, right? I looked him up. And as it turns out, he was the animator that I had admired so much on the 11-second club. It's a small world, right? Keep that in mind. When you interact with other people in the industry, you never know who's who or where they'll go. We're approaching, at this point, like the 9 or 10 year mark, where things were slowing down. And I remember usually when there'd be a break, we at least knew how long it would be for more work to come in. And this time, work was drying up and there was nothing coming up. So something felt very different about this coming layoff. I was concerned for the future of Studio A. I had been with them for just about 10 years and didn't get the opportunities that I felt I deserved. So when I got cut, I had a little bit of soul searching to do.